Imagine sitting in the stands at a regular women's college basketball game. The crowd is buzzing, the players are locked in, and everything looks like a normal competitive matchup. But then, in a matter of seconds, everything completely unravels. One moment the ball is moving up the court. The next moment, players are shouting, bodies are colliding, and chaos is spreading across the floor. And then something happens that almost nobody watching had ever seen before. A referee suddenly collapses to the court. Not because of a fall, not because of a bad step, but because they were caught in the middle of a full-blown fight. For a split second, the entire arena freezes. Players who were just seconds earlier screaming at each other suddenly stop. Coaches rush forward. Medical staff sprint onto the floor. And fans in the crowd are left staring at something that feels almost unreal. A referee knocked down during a college basketball game. It sounds unbelievable. But this moment actually happened during a women's college basketball matchup between South Alabama and Coastal Carolina. And within minutes, the clip would begin spreading across social media, leaving fans everywhere asking the same questions. How did a normal basketball game turn into an all-out brawl? What actually started the fight? And how did a referee end up taking the worst hit of the entire night? Because when people first saw the clip, many thought it had to be fake. The moment looked so chaotic, so sudden, and so shocking that it didn't seem possible for it to unfold in a college game. But the truth is, the fight didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, the tension had been building throughout the game. The rivalry energy between both teams was already high. The stakes were real, and emotions were starting to spill over as the clock ticked down. What happened next turned a regular basketball game into one of the most talked-about moments of the season. And the craziest part? It all started with just a few heated words between two players. But to understand how things spiraled this far out of control, we first need to go back to the beginning of the game, before the chaos started. Because at the start, nothing about this matchup seemed unusual at all. When South Alabama and Coastal Carolina stepped onto the court that night, it was supposed to be just another competitive college basketball game. Both programs came in ready to battle, with players locked in and fans expecting a hard-fought matchup. These kinds of games in women's college basketball are known for their intensity. Teams play with pride, coaches demand discipline, and every possession matters. From the opening tip, the energy in the building was exactly what you'd expect from two teams that didn't want to give up an inch. Players were diving for loose balls. Defenders were fighting through screens. Every rebound turned into a physical battle under the basket. And the crowd could feel that both teams were playing with serious urgency. South Alabama came out aggressive, pushing the pace and looking to control the rhythm of the game early. Their offense was moving quickly, finding open shots, and forcing Coastal Carolina to keep up with the tempo. Coastal Carolina, meanwhile, refused to back down. Every time South Alabama tried to create separation on the scoreboard, Coastal Carolina responded with a run of their own. Shots started falling, defensive stops began stacking up, and the game slowly turned into a back-and-forth fight that kept the crowd fully engaged. You could see it on the players' faces. This wasn't just another regular matchup. There was pride on the line. As the game continued, the physicality started increasing. Hard screens were being set. Players were getting bumped in the lane. Referees were blowing whistles as both teams pushed the boundaries of how aggressive they could play. But up to that point, nothing had crossed the line. Sure, there were moments where players exchanged a few words. That's normal in competitive basketball. Trash talk happens in almost every game, especially when the stakes feel high. Most of the time, it's harmless. Players say something quick, maybe stare each other down for a second, and then move on to the next possession. But sometimes, those small moments can build tension without anyone realizing it. And that's exactly what seemed to be happening in this game. As the minutes passed, the energy between both teams kept getting more heated. The scoreboard remained competitive, and neither side wanted to be the one that blinked first. By the time the fourth quarter arrived, the intensity had reached another level. Every possession suddenly felt more important. Every defensive stop mattered more. And every mistake carried extra weight. South Alabama eventually began to gain a little breathing room on the scoreboard. Their offense started clicking at just the right moment, allowing them to slowly push their lead ahead. But Coastal Carolina wasn't ready to concede anything. Players were still battling for every rebound, diving across the floor, and fighting through contact to keep the game alive. And with just a little over 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, the tension that had been quietly building all night finally reached its breaking point. What started as a small confrontation between two players would suddenly explode into something nobody inside that arena expected, because the next few seconds would completely change the entire game. And it all began with a single heated exchange that quickly spiraled out of control. But what happened next turned a normal basketball game into total chaos. With just over 5 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter, the game was entering the most intense stretch of the night. Every possession suddenly felt heavier. Every whistle mattered more. And the pressure inside the arena was building with each passing second. South Alabama had managed to gain control of the scoreboard, slowly pulling ahead as the clock ticked down. But Coastal Carolina wasn't backing down. Their players were still pushing hard, still fighting for every rebound and every defensive stop like the game was hanging by a thread. And in many ways it was. Because in close, emotional games like this, it doesn't take much for things to change. Sometimes it's a hard foul. Sometimes it's a stare. Sometimes it's just a few words. And on this particular night, it was exactly that. During one possession, two players found themselves battling for position near the paint. South Alabama's Cordasia Harris and Coastal Carolina's Tracy Houston had been matched up several times throughout the game, and like many physical matchups in basketball, there had already been some pushing and bumping between them earlier. Nothing too unusual at first. Just the kind of contact that happens when competitive players refuse to give ground. But this time felt different. As the play ended and players began moving back down the court, something was said between the two. No one could hear exactly what the words were, but the reaction was immediate. Both players turned back toward each other. The tension between them was obvious. For a moment, it looked like it might just be another quick exchange of trash talk. That happens all the time in sports. Players bark something at each other, maybe step a little closer, and then the officials step in to calm things down before the next possession begins. But this time, the situation didn't cool off. It escalated. Instead of walking away, the two players continued facing each other. Voices got louder. Teammates nearby began noticing the confrontation and started drifting toward the scene. At first, it was just a small circle forming around them. A few players stepping closer. A few words being exchanged. Then suddenly, one of the players made the first aggressive move. A shove. It wasn't a massive hit, but it was enough. Enough to flip the switch. The moment that shove happened, everything changed. The reaction was instant. The other player pushed back. Teammates rushed in. Bodies started crowding around the confrontation, and within seconds the calm structure of a basketball game completely disappeared. What had been a controlled environment just moments earlier turned into confusion. Players were shouting. Some were trying to pull teammates away. Others were stepping forward to defend their teammates. The referees immediately recognized what was happening and sprinted toward the group. Their job in moments like this is to separate players before things get worse. But by the time they reached the scene, the situation had already crossed a dangerous line. Because as the circle of players tightened and emotions boiled over, someone threw the first punch. And once that happened, there was no stopping the chaos that followed. What had started as a heated exchange between two players was now turning into something much bigger. And the entire court was about to erupt. But the worst moment of the night was still seconds away. Because when the referees tried to break things up, one of them would end up paying the price for stepping into the middle of the storm. And when that moment happened, the entire arena went silent. The moment that first punch was thrown, everything changed. Up until that point, there was still a small chance the situation could calm down. Sometimes in basketball, players push and shove for a few seconds before coaches and referees manage to separate them. Tempers flare, but things eventually settle. But this time, it didn't slow down. It exploded. The instant that swing happened, the energy on the court shifted from heated tension to full chaos. Players from both teams rushed toward the confrontation almost instinctively. Some were trying to defend their teammates. Others were trying to pull people away before things got worse. But when that many players move toward the same spot at the same time, things can spiral out of control incredibly fast. Within seconds, the small confrontation between two players had turned into a crowded circle of bodies in the middle of the floor. Shouting filled the arena. Players were grabbing jerseys. Others were pushing teammates back. A few players looked like they were trying to separate the situation, but the emotional energy was already too high, and the referees knew they had to act immediately. Officials are trained for moments like this. Their job isn't just to call fouls and manage the flow of the game. When situations start to escalate, they are responsible for stepping in quickly and breaking up conflicts before they turn into something worse. So as soon as the confrontation exploded, the referees sprinted toward the center of the chaos. One official tried to wedge themselves between two players. Another began waving their arms, shouting for everyone to back away. For a brief moment, it almost looked like they might regain control. But the problem was, too many players had already joined the situation. And when emotions reach that level, logic tends to disappear. Some players were still yelling. Others were trying to push their way through the crowd to reach teammates. Bench players, seeing the chaos unfolding in front of them, started stepping onto the court. Now the circle around the fight was getting even bigger. Coaches were shouting from the sidelines, desperately trying to get their players to step away. You could see assistants waving their arms, calling players back to the bench. But the noise and confusion were overwhelming. From the stands, the scene looked completely surreal. What had been a normal basketball game just seconds earlier now looked more like total pandemonium. Bodies were packed tightly together near midcourt. Referees were trying to create space. Players were still exchanging heated words. And in the middle of it all, one official stepped forward again, trying to separate two players who were still locked in the confrontation that had started everything. It was the exact moment where everything could either calm down or get even worse, because just as the referee moved between them, another swing came flying through the crowd. And what happened next was something almost nobody inside that arena expected to see. Instead of hitting its intended target, the punch connected with the referee. In a split second, the official's body jerked backward. Then they collapsed. And suddenly the chaos stopped. Because now, lying on the court in the middle of the brawl, was a referee who had just been knocked down. And the entire arena realized at the exact same moment. This situation had just gone way too far. For a split second, nobody moved. Just moments earlier, the court had been filled with shouting, pushing, and pure chaos. Players were yelling at each other. Referees were trying to separate bodies, and the entire arena felt like it was vibrating with tension. But the instant the referee collapsed to the floor, everything froze. Players who had been screaming seconds earlier suddenly stopped mid-step. Some turned around in confusion, trying to understand what had just happened. Others instinctively backed away from the crowd forming near midcourt. Because when the punch connected, it wasn't just another shove in the middle of a basketball fight. It was something far more serious. The referee had taken the hit. And when the official hit the floor, the sight immediately shocked everyone in the building. From the stands, fans could see the referee lying motionless for a moment on the hardwood. The same person who had been running up and down the court just minutes earlier was now flat on the floor in the center of the chaos. The reaction was instant. Players nearest to the referee stepped back quickly, their expressions changing from anger to concern. Some of them raised their hands, as if to say they didn't realize what had just happened. Others simply stared, trying to process the moment. Because even in heated games where tempers flare, one thing almost never happens. Officials don't get hurt. Referees are supposed to be the ones controlling the game, keeping order, enforcing the rules. Seeing one suddenly lying on the floor after being struck was something almost nobody there had ever witnessed before. On the sidelines, both coaching staffs reacted immediately. Assistant coaches rushed toward the court. Medical staff began sprinting across the floor. And the remaining referees quickly tried to create space around their fallen colleague. Players were now being pushed back toward their benches as officials tried to clear the area. What had been a packed circle of bodies seconds earlier slowly began to open up as everyone realized the seriousness of the situation. The arena, which had been loud just moments before, suddenly grew quiet. You could feel the tension shift from anger to concern. Fans were leaning forward in their seats. Players were watching closely. And medical staff were now kneeling beside the referee, checking to make sure the official was okay. For a few uncomfortable moments, nobody really knew how bad the situation might be. Being hit unexpectedly, especially in the middle of a chaotic situation, can be dangerous. The fact that the referee had gone down so quickly only added to the worry spreading throughout the arena. Some players covered their mouths in shock. Others stood silently near the sidelines. Because no matter which team they played for, everyone understood something important in that moment. The fight had crossed a line. What started as an emotional confrontation between players had now led to a referee being injured in the middle of a college basketball game. And once that happened, the entire tone of the night changed instantly. After a short moment that felt much longer than it actually was, the referee began to move. Medical staff helped the officials slowly sit up while the other referees continued clearing the court. The sight brought a visible sense of relief across the arena. Fans began clapping softly. Players relaxed slightly. And the tension that had filled the building just minutes earlier slowly started to fade. But even though the referee appeared to be recovering, the damage from the incident had already been done. Because a fight of that magnitude doesn't just disappear once the chaos ends. There are consequences. And in college basketball, those consequences can come quickly. Officials began discussing what had happened. The referees huddled together near the scorer's table, reviewing the situation and determining which players had been involved. Coaches were speaking with their teams, trying to regain control after the emotional explosion that had just unfolded. But the longer the referees talked, the more it became clear that this game was about to change dramatically. Because when fights break out during NCAA games, the rulebook doesn't leave much room for debate. Players involved in fighting are automatically ejected. Bench players who leave their seats during the altercation can also be thrown out. And in many cases, those ejections can lead to suspensions for the next game. Which meant the fallout from this moment wasn't just about what happened during the fight. It was about what would happen after. And the number of players about to be removed from the game would leave everyone in the arena stunned all over again. Because once the referees made their final decision, both teams were about to lose a huge portion of their roster. While the referee was being helped off the floor and the arena slowly settled down, the officials gathered near the scorer's table to sort through what had just happened. Moments like this are some of the hardest situations referees face in sports. When a fight breaks out, everything happens fast. Players rush in from different directions, bodies crowd together, and chaos spreads across the court. In the middle of that confusion, referees have to figure out exactly who did what. Who threw punches, who pushed someone, who left the bench, and who escalated the situation. Every detail matters, because NCAA rules are extremely strict when it comes to fights during games. Once a physical altercation happens, referees don't just issue a foul and move on. They start handing out ejections. And the number of players involved in this fight meant there were going to be a lot of them. As the officials reviewed the scene, they began identifying the players who had been part of the confrontation. Some had clearly been in the middle of the fight. Others had sprinted off the bench when they saw their teammates surrounded. Under NCAA rules, even leaving the bench area during a fight can lead to an automatic ejection. That rule exists specifically to prevent small confrontations from turning into massive brawls. But in this situation, emotions had already taken over before anyone could stop it. Players had rushed onto the court without thinking. And now the consequences were about to hit. The referees finally stepped forward to announce their decision. One name after another began appearing on the list. Players from South Alabama were ejected. Players from Coastal Carolina were ejected. By the time the officials finished their announcement, a total of 8 players had been removed from the game. 8. It was an incredible number, especially considering the stage of the game and how important every player on the court had been just minutes earlier. Among those ejected were several key contributors for South Alabama, including some of the team's top scorers and regular starters. Losing that many players at once dramatically changed the rest of the game. The bench suddenly looked much thinner. Coaches had to scramble to reorganize their rotations. And players who hadn't expected to see major minutes were suddenly being called into action. You could see the frustration and disbelief on the faces of the ejected players as they walked toward the locker room. Some looked angry. Others looked stunned by how quickly things had spiraled out of control. Because just minutes earlier, they had been focused on finishing a competitive basketball game. Now they were being escorted off the court entirely. But the consequences didn't stop there. Under NCAA rules, players who are ejected for fighting can face additional punishment beyond just leaving the game. In many cases, those players are automatically suspended for the next game as well. That meant this one moment of chaos could potentially affect multiple games moving forward. For South Alabama, the impact was especially serious. Several of the players ejected were not just role players. They were key pieces of the team's offense throughout the season. Losing them even temporarily could create major problems in upcoming matchups. Coastal Carolina faced similar issues. Their roster had also been hit by the ejections, leaving the team short-handed and frustrated after a night that had already spiraled out of control. Meanwhile, the referees worked to restore order so the game could finally continue. Players who remained were instructed to return to their benches. Coaches tried to calm their teams down, and the arena slowly returned to the structured environment of a basketball game. But even though the referees eventually restarted play, the atmosphere felt completely different. The intensity that had built throughout the night had now turned into something else entirely. A mixture of shock, embarrassment, and disbelief over what had just happened. The final minutes of the game moved forward, but it was obvious that the fight had overshadowed everything else. The scoreboard still mattered. The outcome of the game still counted. But nobody inside the arena would remember this night for the final score. Because the moment a referee was knocked down during the fight, the game had already become something much bigger than basketball. And once the final buzzer sounded, the real conversation about what had happened was only just beginning. Because as clips of the fight started spreading online, fans everywhere began reacting. And the reactions were loud. Some people were furious. Others were shocked. And many were asking one big question. How could something like this happen in a college basketball game? By the time the final buzzer sounded, the game itself almost felt like an afterthought. Yes, South Alabama had officially won the matchup. The scoreboard showed an 80-70 result. But nobody was talking about the score anymore. The only thing people wanted to talk about was the fight. Because while the players were heading back to their locker rooms and coaches were trying to gather their teams, the video of the brawl had already begun spreading online. And once it hit social media, it exploded. Clips of the moment started circulating across sports pages, fan accounts, and discussion forums within minutes. One camera angle showed the heated confrontation between the two players. Another clip zoomed in on the moment the crowd of bodies formed around midcourt. But the video everyone kept replaying was the one that captured the referee collapsing. Fans watching the clip for the first time couldn't believe what they were seeing. At first, many people assumed the referee must have slipped or gotten tangled in the middle of the chaos. But after watching the video closely, it became clear that the official had been caught directly in the middle of the swing. And that realization sparked a wave of reactions across the internet. Some fans were stunned. Others were furious. And many people were asking the same question over and over again. How did things get this far? Sports commentators quickly began discussing the moment online. Some pointed out that basketball fights, while rare, do occasionally happen when emotions run high. But what made this incident different was the fact that a referee ended up getting hurt. Officials are supposed to be protected during games. They're there to enforce the rules, maintain order, and ensure that competition stays under control. When an official gets injured in the middle of a game, it instantly raises serious concerns. Because if referees can't safely step in to stop fights, then controlling those situations becomes far more dangerous. Fans began debating whether the punch that hit the referee was intentional or simply an accident during the chaos. Some viewers believed the player never meant to hit the official, and that the referee just happened to step into the wrong place at the wrong time. Others argued that once a fight breaks out and punches start flying, accidents like this become almost inevitable. But regardless of how it happened, one thing was clear. The moment had crossed a line, and the reaction from fans reflected that. Comment sections filled with thousands of messages. Some people demanded harsh punishments for the players involved. Others blamed the situation on the intensity of modern college basketball, where rivalries and emotions sometimes boil over. Even former players began weighing in, sharing their thoughts about the moment. Many of them said the same thing. When a fight starts, everything moves incredibly fast. Players react on instinct, adrenaline kicks in, and it can become difficult to control emotions. But they also emphasized that once punches are thrown, the consequences can be serious. And in this case, the consequences were already unfolding. Because as the video spread, it wasn't just fans watching. League officials were watching too. The NCAA takes incidents like this extremely seriously, especially when they involve physical altercations and injured officials. Even though the referees had already issued ejections during the game, the league would now begin reviewing the situation more closely, which meant the players involved could potentially face additional punishment beyond the game itself. and that possibility added even more tension to the aftermath of the incident. Meanwhile, both teams were left dealing with the immediate fallout. Coaches were answering questions. Players were being asked about what happened. And the entire situation had suddenly become one of the most talked-about moments in women's college basketball. But while the fight itself had shocked everyone watching, it also started a much bigger conversation. Because this incident wasn't just about one heated moment during a game. It raised questions about how intense and emotional women's college basketball has become in recent years. The sport has grown rapidly, drawing larger audiences and gaining more national attention. With that growth has come more pressure, bigger rivalries, and higher expectations for players competing at the highest level. And sometimes, when competition reaches that level, emotions can spill over. But even with that context, what happened in this game was still incredibly rare. Because fights might happen occasionally in sports. But a referee getting knocked down in the middle of one? That's the kind of moment people remember for a long time. And as more people began watching the video, many started asking a deeper question. What does this moment say about the current state of the game? Because while the fight lasted only a few chaotic seconds, the conversation surrounding it was just getting started. As the dust settled from the game, one thing became very clear. This moment wasn't going to fade away quickly. The video had already gone viral, and with every new replay, more fans were discovering the story. For many people, this was the first time they had ever seen anything like it happen in women's college basketball. And that's exactly why the incident started a larger discussion. Over the past few years, women's college basketball has experienced massive growth. The sport has been attracting more attention, bigger audiences, and more passionate fan bases than ever before. Star players have become national names. Games are being watched by millions. And the competition level across the country has risen dramatically. But with that growth comes intensity. Players are competing harder. Rivalries feel bigger. And every game can carry more pressure than it did in the past. When athletes compete at that level, emotions can run high. Every possession matters, every foul feels personal, and players are constantly battling for position, pride, and victory. Most of the time, that intensity leads to incredible moments, clutch shots, dramatic comebacks, and unforgettable performances. But occasionally, it can also lead to situations where emotions spill over. That's what many people believe happened during this game. What started as a heated exchange between two competitors quickly escalated because neither side wanted to back down. Teammates rushed in to defend each other. Voices got louder. Tempers flared. And before anyone could fully stop it, the confrontation had turned into a full brawl. Moments like this remind everyone just how quickly sports can change. 1 second you're watching a normal possession. The next second you're witnessing a situation nobody expected. And while the fight itself lasted only a short time, the image of that referee collapsing to the floor instantly became the defining moment of the night. It was shocking. It was chaotic. And it served as a reminder that even in organized competition, things can spiral out of control if emotions take over. Fortunately, the referee appeared to recover after the incident, which brought relief to everyone involved. Medical staff were able to check on the official, and the situation did not appear to result in any long-term injury. But the moment itself will likely be remembered for years. Not because of the score, not because of a game-winning shot, but because of a few chaotic seconds that turned an ordinary basketball game into a viral sports story. When people first watched the viral clip of the fight, it looked like pure chaos. Bodies rushing in from every direction, players shouting, referees trying to push people apart, and then suddenly, a referee falling to the floor. But what most viewers didn't realize is that the moment unfolded much faster than it appeared on camera. When you slow the sequence down and look closely at the few seconds before the referee went down, you can see how quickly the situation spiraled out of control. It all happened in less than 10 seconds. At first, the two players at the center of the confrontation were still facing each other after the initial shove. Teammates were beginning to close in around them, creating a tight circle near the middle of the court. You could already see the referees sprinting toward the situation. Officials know that the first few seconds after a confrontation are the most important. If they can get between players quickly enough, they can usually stop the situation before it becomes a fight. But in this case, the timing worked against them. As the referees approached, the crowd of players had already grown too large. One official moved to separate two players who were still shouting face to face. Another referee tried to step in from the side, raising their arms and telling everyone to back away. For a brief moment, it actually looked like the officials might regain control. Some players began stepping backward. Others turned their heads toward their benches as coaches yelled for them to return. But then one sudden movement changed everything. A player inside the crowd made a quick swing toward another player. The motion was fast, almost instinctive, and the moment that swing happened, the entire situation escalated instantly. More players surged forward. Someone else pushed into the group. Now the crowd of bodies tightened even more, making it nearly impossible for the referees to move freely inside the circle. This is the moment where everything became unpredictable. Because when multiple players are packed together like that, even a small movement can send the entire group shifting in different directions. As the referee stepped forward again to separate two players, another swing came flying through the crowd. The official had no time to react, no time to step away. And before anyone fully realized what was happening, the referee was hit. The impact caused the official's body to snap backwards slightly before they lost their balance. Within a split second, the referee collapsed to the hardwood. And in that instant, the entire atmosphere inside the arena changed. What had been a chaotic fight suddenly turned into stunned silence. Players who had been pushing and shouting just moments earlier froze when they saw the referee on the floor. A few athletes instinctively backed away from the center of the court, their expressions shifting from anger to shock. You could almost see the realization spreading across the players' faces. This had gone too far. Even the players who had been caught in the middle of the confrontation seemed unsure how to react. Some stood still, looking down at the referee. Others raised their hands, as if trying to signal that they hadn't meant for the situation to escalate that far. On the sidelines, coaches reacted immediately. Both benches erupted with shouting as staff members rushed toward the court. Trainers followed close behind, moving quickly toward the fallen official. And suddenly the focus of the entire building shifted. This was no longer about a fight between players. Now it was about the referee. Medical staff knelt beside the official, checking to make sure they were responsive. The remaining referees quickly pushed players farther away, creating space so the trainers could do their job. Fans in the crowd leaned forward anxiously. Some people stood up. Others covered their mouths in shock as they waited to see if the referee would move. Those few moments felt much longer than they actually were. Finally, the referee began to stir. The sight brought a visible wave of relief across the arena. Players relaxed slightly. Fans began clapping, and the tension that had filled the building started to ease. But even though the referee appeared to be recovering, the damage had already been done. Because in the span of just a few chaotic seconds, the game had transformed from a competitive matchup into one of the most shocking moments of the season. And now the consequences of those few seconds were about to follow everyone involved long after the final buzzer. Because once the video started spreading across the internet, the focus shifted to one big question. Who was responsible for what happened? And the answer to that question would soon put one particular player right at the center of the controversy. Once the clips of the fight began spreading across the internet, the conversation quickly shifted from the chaos itself to something more specific. People wanted to know exactly who was responsible. Because while the brawl involved several players from both teams, viewers watching the footage over and over began focusing on one key detail: the swing that accidentally struck the referee. And as slow-motion clips started appearing online, fans began trying to identify the player at the center of that moment. This is where things became complicated. In chaotic situations like this, it's rarely as simple as pointing to one single person. Basketball fights happen in tight spaces where multiple players are moving at once. Arms are swinging, bodies are shifting, and players are trying to react in the middle of a storm of adrenaline. But once social media begins analyzing every frame of a viral video, the spotlight inevitably lands on someone. And that's exactly what happened here. Fans began posting screenshots. Sports pages shared slowed-down angles. Comment sections filled with debates as people tried to piece together what happened in those few seconds before the referee went down. Some viewers believed they could clearly see which player threw the swing that struck the official. Others argued that the moment happened too quickly to place the blame on one person. And that disagreement quickly turned into one of the biggest discussions surrounding the incident. Because if there's one thing the internet is known for, It's trying to solve moments like this in real time. Thousands of people began analyzing the footage frame by frame. Some tried to zoom in on the crowd of players. Others slowed the video down to a near standstill, hoping to identify exactly who was standing where when the swing happened. But the more people watched the clip, the more obvious one thing became. The entire moment was chaotic. Players were packed together tightly. Arms were moving in multiple directions. And the referee had stepped directly into the middle of the crowd just seconds before the impact. Which meant the moment that knocked the official down may not have been aimed at the referee at all. In fact, most analysts who looked closely at the footage suggested the same thing. The referee appeared to be an unintended target, caught in the middle of a swing meant for someone else. That distinction mattered, because while throwing a punch during a basketball game can lead to serious consequences, striking an official is an entirely different level of offense in organized sports. Referees are considered protected participants in the game. They enforce the rules. They maintain order. And any action that directly harms an official can carry severe disciplinary consequences. That's why so many fans were trying to determine exactly what happened. Was the referee intentionally struck? Or was the official simply in the wrong place during a chaotic moment? The evidence pointed strongly toward the second explanation. But even if the contact was accidental, the consequences of the fight itself were still significant. Because the moment punches are thrown during a college basketball game, the situation automatically triggers a series of disciplinary actions. Players can be ejected immediately. Bench players who step onto the court during the altercation can also be removed. And depending on the severity of the incident, additional suspensions can follow in the days after the game. For the players involved, this meant that the fallout from the fight was far from over. Even after the final buzzer sounded and the arena emptied out, officials from the conference and the NCAA would begin reviewing the situation more closely. Game footage would be analyzed. Reports from referees would be submitted. And the league would determine whether further punishment was necessary. Meanwhile, the player believed to have thrown the swing that struck the referee suddenly found themselves at the center of a viral sports story. Not because they had planned to become the face of the incident, but because their name had become connected to one of the most shocking moments of the game. And situations like this can be incredibly difficult for young athletes. College players are often only a few years removed from high school. They're competing under pressure, representing their schools, and trying to perform at a high level in front of thousands of fans. When something unexpected like this happens, the spotlight can arrive instantly. One moment you're playing basketball. The next moment your name is trending online. Fans are discussing your actions. Analysts are reviewing footage. And reporters are asking questions. For many athletes, that kind of sudden attention can be overwhelming. Because behind every viral sports clip are real people dealing with real consequences. And in this situation, the focus had shifted away from the excitement of competition and toward the responsibility that comes with competing at this level. Coaches from both programs understood that reality immediately. In the hours following the game, both teams began addressing the incident publicly. Coaches spoke about sportsmanship, discipline, and the importance of maintaining control during emotional moments. They emphasized that the actions during the fight did not represent the values of their programs. And most importantly, they expressed relief that the referee appeared to recover after the incident. Because despite the chaos of the moment, the well-being of everyone involved was the priority. Still, the larger conversation surrounding the fight wasn't finished yet. In fact, it was just beginning. Because as officials continued reviewing the footage and determining the full consequences of the incident, another question started emerging among fans and analysts. Could this moment lead to even stricter rules or penalties for fights in college basketball? And if so, the impact of those chaotic few seconds might extend far beyond just one game. Because sometimes a single moment in sports becomes bigger than the game itself. Sometimes it forces the entire sport to take a closer look at how situations like this happen, and how they can be prevented in the future. In the end, it's a reminder of how unpredictable sports can be. Players train their entire lives to compete at the highest level, but sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't the ones that happen with the ball in the air. Sometimes they're the moments nobody expects at all. And if there's one thing fans learned from this incident, it's that even a normal basketball game can suddenly turn into something unbelievable. Before you go, if you enjoy hearing the real stories behind the biggest and most shocking moments in sports, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because there are a lot more wild moments in the world of basketball that most fans never hear about. And trust me, some of them are even crazier than this one.